Sharon. I am one of the chairs of Design Incubation, and I am also on the board of AIGA New York. So thank you all for coming out on a Saturday afternoon. This is a special event. Stacy can fact check me. Is this the first time we have a three-way sponsorship here?
Yes.
So this is a really special event because with Design Incubation, we've been looking to partner with other organizations, and my work with AIGA New York and Liz's work, knowing everybody here at TDC, has allowed us to offer this event in the TDC space with sponsorship from AIGA and Design Incubation. So I'm going to put on my Design Incubation hat here for a second and just tell all of you who don't already know about Design Incubation a little bit about what we do. So Design Incubation is we're a group of educators who really came together here in New York a couple years ago, thinking, wow, we really feel siloed in our own disciplines. We probably have a greater number of design educators here in New York Metro than anywhere else in the country, arguably maybe even the world, and yet we didn't know what we were doing, what other people in other institutions were up to. We're grappling with a lot of the same things, the challenges that we're facing with students and administrations, we wanted to be able to share our, best practices and experiences with each other. And so that's how Design Incubation sort of formed informally. I think about that as Design Incubation 1.0. Then we moved into having colloquiums. So one of our part of the mission of Design Incubation is to promote research and scholarship in design, and particularly for design educators. And so the colloquium, we offer usually about 6 a year, and that gives educators an opportunity to spend 5 minutes talking about a project, something they're doing in their teaching, and to receive feedback from their peers. And really that piece about feedback from peers is so essential because it allows people to present a project that may just be starting out. It's more like a seed than a finished thing. And getting that feedback, not just from people in our own institutions or maybe from peer review boards, but also from just other interested educators, has been really invaluable. Now, in Design Incubation 2.0, we also offer a fellowship. So we see more and more design educators and designers in general interested in writing and in traditional forms of scholarship. And so the Design Incubation Fellowship happens at St. John's Manhattan campus, which is right by Cooper Union, in January, and participants come together for 3 days of intensive work around writing and editing with a group. I think this year we have 13 participants, and it's a competitive process, so people apply from all over the country and then they come in for those 3 days. In Design Incubation 3.0, so we're 2 years old, we're just a little older than 2 years old now. So as we move into our 3rd year, we're hoping to also create content around issues of tenure and promotion, around best practices in research and scholarship, and start to disseminate some of that. And so the other thing that is going to happen is that we're going to be sort of trying to engage with all of you folks who are out there doing this so that we can really crowdsource some of those ideas, and it's not just us creating content and pushing it out. In terms of my work with Design Incubation, I lead our fellowship program. If you have a program, I don't know if everybody got a program, but you'll also see that we have events coming up in SUNY New Paltz is going to host a colloquium in September, right? Next September, we're going to be in Kent State in Ohio. In March, probably in San Jose, either in February or April. We're still trying to nail something down on that. An event here in New York in February. And so once you're on our mailing list, you'll receive some information about those events too. I want to thank AIGA New York for providing some of the outreach. How many of you came through AIGA New York? Great, so that's sort of awesome because that's the power of all of our organizations working together. So they messaged out to members. They also provided the lovely wine and Pellegrino back there, so we're very happy to them for both contributions. And then we're also really pleased for TDC to be giving us this great space on a Saturday afternoon. And I was hoping that Doug Klaus, who's president of TDC, could just say a few words about TDC and being here in this space?
Oh, sure. I just want to say welcome to everyone, and I'm really glad we can help and sponsor this because we've been around for 70 years, and in the original bylaws for the Typewriters Club, there was a directive to support education, specifically in typography, but I think that spreads out to all kinds of design.
Right.
The Typewriters Club general goal is to promote excellence in typography. So anyway, welcome everyone. Glad you're here.
Awesome, and I just part of the panel and the discussion that happens afterwards is the meat certainly of this event. But afterwards, as you can see from our sort of setup back here, we hope that you'll stick around, you'll talk to each other, because part of it is also getting to know other educators in the New York area. And so to that end. Please feel free to speak to me. Robin Landa is one of our chairs of Design Incubation. Dan Wong, founder and chair of Design Incubation. Liz Deluna, chair of Design Incubation. So if you're interested in Design Incubation, please feel free to speak to any of us. If you're interested in AIGA, I'll be here from the board. Allison Puff is here, who is also a co-chair of the DEC, so can talk about some of the other design education related things that are happening maybe nationally. So without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Liz, and we can talk about the panel. Excellent. Great. Thanks.
It's like Mark is going to start.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I'm just going to reiterate Eris's thanks. I want to thank the TEC for hosting us here, AIGA for sponsoring Design Incubation, and especially Design Incubation because that's sort of the organization that sort of took this idea that Liz and I had and sort of really helped us nurture it and get it to this space right now.
So that is how this idea started. Mark and I were at a panel called Designing the Future of Design Education. And that panel had heads of the programs from RISD, from CCA, and from Parsons. And it was a great conversation, but we felt like, what about all the other schools? What about the large liberal arts schools? What about the state schools? What about all these other schools that have design programs? We thought, there's a lot of us that teach there, why don't we have a conversation with these people about these programs? Which led us to where we are now.
As far as introductions, I'm Mark Zurolo. I teach at University of Connecticut. I've been there for about 15 years. High up above Hartford in idyllic stores. It's been a great experience. We sort of entered in a program at the time that was kind of rocky and rough, and had been through some difficult times, and sort of rebuilt this thing over all these years, which anybody in academia knows that change is slow, but it can happen.
And I'm Liz Deluna. I teach at St. John's University, graphic design. This is my 11th year, and I teach with Eris. And my background was actually in film and motion graphics, so I came later to graphic design through a graduate program where I met Mark. And I'm actually interested in knowing how many people here are actually design educators. And how many students? And designers, other interested parties, non-designers? One. Okay. So I feel like right now everything, what we say, what we do, what we write, what we design is going to be critical for the next 4 years. We all acknowledge that it's difficult to have any other conversation right now given the agitated political climate, but we hope to save that conversation for afterwards, for a social conversation, and just use this as a diversion to talk about design education. I hope that regardless of where we're teaching, we can all use our skills to instill values of diversity, inclusion, working towards a more equitable and sustainable society, and teach critical thinking and conversation.
Right. And there's no better way to do those things, right, than with some discussion and conversation. So let's have one.
So we'll start with introductions of everybody, myself. You go.
Mark Zurolo?
No, I mean, do you want to ask them anything specific of this?
No, so what we want to do is to have each of our panelists sort of introduce themselves and their a little bit about your background as both an educator and a practitioner, and the program, of course, that you're from.
So my name is Allan Espiritu. I am an associate professor at Rutgers University. I had the graphic design program at the smallest campus of the Rutgers system, Camden, which is right across the river from Philadelphia. I run a full-time design studio, GD Loft, out in Philadelphia as well, where we serve mostly nonprofit and cultural institutions in Philadelphia. So that alone is a whole conversation.
I'm Jessica Wexler. I'm an assistant professor at Purchase College, State University of New York. I also coordinate the graphic design department there. For over 10 years, I had an independent studio here in New York and in Los Angeles. I have been teaching since I graduated from California Institute of the Arts. And recently, after I closed my studio, due to the impossibility of being able to support a lifestyle and my family, I've started a pedagogical practice called workshopproject.org.
I'm Nick Brock. I am an assistant professor in graphic design at Boston University. And it's my 6th year teaching there, and I teach in both the undergraduate and the graduate program. I run a small design practice, kind of doing a little bit of everything, called Station. And by small, I mean it's me and my wife, who tells me what to do on the business side of things. But yeah, that's I went to Yale for graduate school, and then kind of quickly moved up to Boston.
My name is Kelly, Kelly Walters, and I'm a native of Connecticut, which is awesome. I teach at UConn. I'm an assistant professor in graphic design. I'm an alum of UConn as well, so that's also a really interesting conversation there. But I also received my master's at RISD. So my artistic practice, my design practice is pretty multidisciplinary, just in terms of what I make, whether it's digital, whether it's print, whether it's textiles. It ranges in pretty much everything. But my personal, I guess, practice is called Bright Polka Dot, and it is that sort of interdisciplinary space. But yeah, it's a bit about me.
Great. Hi, I'm again Wong. I've been teaching for, I'm kind of losing track now, I think it's 8 or 9 years. I'm at the New York City College of Technology, which is part of CUNY. We're in downtown Brooklyn. We are one of the larger programs in communication design. We have about anywhere between 1,000 and 1,200 students. We have like anywhere between 20 and 22 faculty, and then about 80 adjunct faculty. Which is, yeah, it's large. At the same time, we have specializations within our program in the junior year. We have advertising, graphic design, web design, broadcast design, illustration, and animation. Prior to teaching, I worked as a designer and art director for 10 years, both in corporate and running my own business. I would say, surprisingly, I guess I forgot to mention, I largely focus on the web design concentration within our program. I did some of that. Well, my business with my partner was largely web application development. But when I was in corporate, I did a significant amount of print, so I have a lot of print experience as well. And I went to school at Cranbrook Academy of Art for sculpture.
Okay. I'm Robin Landa. I'm a distinguished professor at the Michael Graves College at Kean University. I've been there for 29 years. Of course, I started when I was 12 years old. I have a branding practice. I teach advertising design, graphic design, promotional design, and I've written a few books about design. And now.
29? Something like that?
Just a few.
She's going to be 110 years old soon. Okay, so we will start with the first question, and I will start by asking Allan, and then we can move through this question, I guess, is our sort of big overarching question. And that question is, some of the largest enrollments in graphic design programs are found in universities and colleges. What are the advantages and disadvantages of learning and teaching graphic design in a liberal arts institution versus an art institution for both the student and the professor?
I mean, for me, the obvious one is the cross-disciplinary kind of aspect of, you know, within the program. So I can only talk about my program itself. I'm able to create courses with other programs in the university. Many of my programs, and I should say mine's a BA program as opposed to a BFA, which is, I'm limited to 48 credits for these students. So I have to be very creative in my curriculum. And what I do, the benefit of being in such a liberal arts institution is to have these kind of mashup classes. I have many classes where I teach with another professor. Like right now, I'm teaching with an English graduate professor, and the graduate students are working with my undergrad graphic design students, and we are in this class on the contents written or developed by these master writing students. And my students kind of challenge the writing, and we figure out different ways to kind of visualize the language. So what, you know, I do a lot of that. I have to, within 48 credits. You know, that is the biggest advantage. I mean, the disadvantage is the 48 credits. I mean, I have a type 1, I have a web 1, I have graphic design 1 through 4. I have a thesis class, a senior project class, and that's it. You know, so within those, I have to service my students, and, you know.
When you say 48 credits, are you talking about the entire degree, or are you just talking about those are the credits that you have to play with?
That I can play with within my major, okay. Because it's 120 credits to graduate from Rutgers, at least with the BA program. Those are in the liberal arts, language, math, writing, sciences. They have to take diversity classes as well. So the rest of those are
diversity
classes.
Yeah.
So
curious about that.
Yeah.
So that's 48 out of 120.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That really isn't very.
No, it's not at all. Yeah.
And Jessica, how about you? How do you feel about teaching in a liberal arts institution? And a lot of us, I think, are products of art institutions. Is that not? No?
I'm not.
No. Okay.
I'm a liberal arts guy.
I'm a hybrid.
Hybrid?
Yeah, I am as well.
Okay.
Well, I mean, Purchases program is inside of the School of Art and Design, which is inside of the School of Art. So even though there is a School of Letters and Science, in sort of faculty governance and in like sort of political disputes, it feels like we are two schools. That people talk about the needs of the School of the Arts as being different, essentially different. Also conservatory, or the history of being conservatory. The Letters and Sciences, this is different. And I actually think that, I mean, myself, I think there's a huge potential. I think that one of our most fundamental skills that we need to teach students is how to become critical thinkers. And I do not believe that form making does that, even though I love form. So one of the great benefits, or I would say at least the great potential, and I certainly hope this is the case moving forward, of having graphic design inside of an institution that houses the liberal arts is because the liberal arts teaches critical thinking skills. And that's what I want my students to have.
It's true. So at BU, it's interesting. I mean, it's a similar kind of structure where we're like insulated, but there's a College of Fine Arts and then a School of Visual Arts and then the graphic design department within the School of Visual Arts. But students apply into the College of Fine Arts as well as BU, so you could get not accepted into the College of Fine Arts, but you can get accepted into BU and vice versa. So it's like a weird structure of art school inside the university in some respects. But that said, so our students get this. If they come in as a freshman, they're going through a core foundation of fine arts, and then they have a graphic design program, which is it's a 3-year program at BU. But the benefits, I think, are just opportunities and resources. I mean, and we really push them on this, but the students get to collaborate with business students, and they get to go to the engineering school, and they get to work with computer science majors, and it's the diversity of interests and skills and resources that they have at their disposal, which they mostly don't take advantage of, but they're there. That I think is the biggest advantage, that the school feels very big in those moments when you can say, oh, go down to the engineering center and have that thing laser cut, or work with a 3D printer, because we don't have those resources, but somebody wealthy donated to the engineering school and they have them, and you can get them for free. So being able to say that gives us a lot of freedom, which I kind of love.
And how many credit hours do your students need? And it's always a hard question.
It's hard. BU still kind of boggles my mind a little bit, because they're on this weird 4-credit, 2-credit structure instead of a 3-credit, 1-credit. So it seems like they come out with some enormous amount of, like, 137 credits in the end total. But
it's a difference.
I'd have to do the math in my head to say what our credits are. But
no math today.
It's a lot. It's a lot, and it seems intensive to me. Like, I don't know how they do it, but.
Yeah, and I think to echo on that, I was just kind of writing down my notes, but I think the projects are richer coming out of a liberal arts institution sometimes, because, again, the level of research that you can get into just to kind of make the project have more legs, I think, is there. And so with our library, Homer Babbage Library is like insane. If you've ever been to the UConn library, and I think that just being able to know that you have that as sort of a source, in addition to your classmates, in addition to your faculty that are in your department, but also outside of your department. And I think that for me, being a product of a liberal arts institution, before going into an art school, I realized the difference. And so I saw very much like where sort of there's these really interesting sort of pedagogical models happening in both places, that there were things that I benefited from having as an undergrad, knowing that I was taking all of these classes, whether it was a sociology class, whether it was a sort of a public speaking class, because what I also was interested in seeing when I got to RISD was seeing how, because of the emphasis so much on the formal aspect, there was sort of like a hole that was missed. And I think that you know, you could say, hey, you can go to Brown and take a class, and take a class within the context of your coursework, but it was really difficult to do that. And the model was also, you know, 6 hours, I think it was about 5 or 6 hours per class. So to be able to weave in and out of that to then go teach a class at Brown was very problematic. So I think that, you know, now just kind of looking at, you know, the students that I'm working with in my program, I'm excited to kind of create a hybrid space of both form and conversation in terms of research and depth. And so I think that's a huge advantage that you can have going to a liberal arts institution. And I think at the same time, right, the disadvantage, I would say, is not necessarily being immersed in all the arts all the time. And I think that is a problem too, because, right, you don't have that complete exposure all the time. And I think that you know, it's exciting to be surrounded by lectures and gallery exhibitions happening, and being able to kind of be in a space that you're just in it. You're in it, and you're on your grind. It's art 24/7, and I think that is a special place that I think students should also get to experience too. So I think in that way sometimes that's a disadvantage, but yeah.
Right. You know, City Tech, well, number one, I haven't taught anything else besides City Tech, so it's hard for me to compare. And I think that our program is somewhat unique because if you understand the history of our college, we were originally a vocational college, and we were a 2-year program. And then in the late 90s, we became a senior college and offered 4-year programs. Just an aside, I hope I don't embarrass him, but my mentor is here, Joel Mason, who was the chair for how many years?
21.
21 years. So if I misspeak, maybe he'll speak up and correct me. But so, because we're such a large, in a lot of ways, the way we've developed our curriculum is very similarly modeled after the art and design schools and the BFA, even though our program is called a BTEC, which I'm not exactly sure what that is. I'd love to have more, be more in depth and really understand the difference between a BFA and a BA, and also the whole discussion of what is a B design, because we're going through NASA accreditation and considering getting a BFA. And I've been doing my research, and there isn't a lot of information, but maybe we'll address that a little later. So in our school, we have a number of professional programs, including like nursing and hospitality. So I would say the benefit is we can do these interdisciplinary projects with other programs in our school, which is very exciting. We also do have a significant number of general education requirements, maths and sciences and what have you. So we're kind of, a little bit art school, a little bit liberal arts, and I'd love to know what the difference is between those two.
I really believe in T-shaped thinking. I believe that designers shouldn't just be I thinkers, meaning you only know about your discipline, but that you need to branch out in that T-shape into the liberal arts and into the other arts. And being housed in a liberal arts university provides that for my students. They take quite a few credits in the humanities and the liberal arts. So that's one terrific factor. The other is that my university houses a human rights institute. And so last week, John Prendergast came to speak to my students, and my students have had the opportunity to work for social justice through John Prendergast. And I was hoping he'd bring George Clooney, but he did tell us that he played basketball with President Obama, George Clooney, and Don Cheadle 2 weeks ago. So that was good enough for my students. But it's really wonderful when you have that kind of rich structure in a university system that usually a fine art only institution doesn't have. I mean, RISD is related to Brown, so you get that. But it's wonderful, I think, to know that my students have read world literature and have taken sociology and anthropology and math science too.
I just want to add, can I add one addendum? Just from the perspective, I am, art school educated, but one thing that this really has made me think about is that I am absolutely a very different person and professor than went into the classroom 11 years ago, because I teach at a liberal arts school, and because I have students that don't come in necessarily as visually cultured. It has really forced me to find ways to break down language and find ways to teach visual language to them with different levels of accountability that I didn't really think about as an art student. And I definitely respect what Kelly is saying about being an art school. There is that great art school place, but there was definitely there's something about teaching in liberal arts that has really changed how I think and how I teach.
So moving on, I think some of you sort of touched upon this a little bit in terms of sort of Kelly being immersed in art all the time. So in order to build a house, you have to learn how to swing a hammer. To produce graphic design today, it demands a fluency and a whole array of skills. How do programs negotiate that application of skill? Many times software, technical, but then we also want to address these issues as critical thinking. Where do all these things come together, and how do we deal with them in such a way that it doesn't become completely overwhelming for students to try and absorb and digest all the things they need to do to be able to make good work?
And form making, like analog form making, old school. Is that important? Do we still need it? Like,
I think it's critically important. I mean, it's like history. You have to know like how a book is made to make a book and to challenge what a book is.
Not if you don't read books.
I think it's, you gave us that question. I think hand skills are just so important. It's just a different way of thinking. I mean, when you're physically, I have students, like, I love the students that do work, and I'm like, did you print it out? Oh no, I just saw it on my screen for the it's the first time I've seen it printed. I'm like, if you saw it printed, it's a whole different thing, you know? It's kind of that to me. You know, you have an appreciation for the form, for the thing that you are, you know, as a designer making. I think it's very important. And not to say, I mean, and you know, vocabulary still comes. I mean, things from InDesign like leading, and I mean, all those things are historically still connected to hand things.
So then how does software sort of figure into this? I mean, this hand skills are important, okay, established, but software is a big deal. It takes a while to sort of master that learning curve.
I have a way to go. I have to do it a certain way. I think, again, with my limitation of credits, my classes are really developed, it's all about critical design thinking. And I actually make them learn things on their own. I give them a project, figure out how to do it. I'm gonna teach you basic things. I'll teach you the basics of this program, but your job is to critically figure out how the program works.
Sorry. I guess I was just gonna say, but then how do you expect them to use the tool appropriately? Like like, cause I'm interested too in this, like, here's the project, figure it out, and here's the tool that you should use to make that work. But I see it happen all the time that they figured out a way, but it may not be the right way. Like it kind of, it's then sort of reinforcing these like operations within the tool to kind of like figure out a solution that like, should there have been crop marks, for example, and there weren't any crop marks, or like, is there a grid system inside of the InDesign file, but there actually isn't, it isn't actually a grid. I remember having a conversation with a student literally 2 days ago about like a postcard project that they're working on, and I said, did you know, put in a grid, right? And that's me saying, help them figure it out on their own. And then I looked at the file and I was like, what happened here, right? Because I think that there's a part of it where, you know, they do need to figure out some of that, but I also feel like that there still needs to be a little bit of a guidance into using some of these tools appropriately. Not to say it's about that tool and about tools and it only being InDesign is the only way, but I do think that there still needs to be some kind of guidance in that, even though throughout, like, all kinds of software is changing, right? So InDesign, since the time that, I think it was on 3 when I was, you know, going through, and now we're at like Creative Cloud. And then there's people who, like, I'm sure in this room, who are not even on 3 or like earlier versions of it, right? Exactly, or Quark or something.
If I might, to play devil's advocate here a little bit, I do wonder how the, you know, if you are limited to, say, 48 credits, you know, does it make sense to teach them more traditional techniques? The fact is that when they get out there, the majority of the work is going to be digital. You know, when you think about how much information you consume in a day and how much of it is actually being consumed on paper versus, you know, your phone and your computer and your television, I wonder, does it really make sense to be focusing on bookbinding and, you know, margins and that sort of thing? The other thing I also think about a lot is there's this, you know, talking about training software is like, everybody has decided that that's a bad thing. At the same time, when you think about more traditional, you know, tools and materials, you used to have, say, an oil painting class and a watercolor class and a printmaking class and, you know, intaglio and all these different methods, because you have to learn how to use the tools effectively in order to be truly good at using those tools and creating interesting things. So I, you know, question whether or not teaching software is a terrible thing, because, you know, vector program after vector program that has very similar tools, if you can go deep into one of them, particularly the industry standard, it makes you better at learning these other tools. If you don't train them properly using the appropriate software, they're never going to become very adept at using that tool.
So maybe it's more about how the software is taught.
Perhaps.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I would say, like, for us, we have kind of an unwritten policy of not teaching the software, but it happens by default. And by that I mean, we'll give some guidance, like you guys should probably be using Illustrator and InDesign to do these posters, and these are the reasons why. But let them go at it, and then choose the lessons to raise up in our sort of studio environment. So when somebody's struggling with something, or somebody's not applying a grid in some way, to pause for a moment in the studio to choose that as the lesson for, like, okay, well, this group needs to learn this specific skill set. I think as a culture, they, at least I've found that my students tend to share their own learning, and they learn quite a bit without me having to do formal demonstrations of the software. With the really introductory levels, I may do a very brief demo, like, this is your way around this software. Go figure the rest out. But I think that's far enough. Like, from my perspective, it's just a tool, and the tools change constantly, and it's different than a skill set in terms of form. So teaching grid design is one thing, because you might apply that in any kind of software, but teaching that specific grid design in InDesign isn't always necessary, I feel like. I think, like, it's constantly evolving, it's constantly changing. We try to give them projects and say, okay, well, you figure out what program is best to do this particular thing in. If you're going to do a video project, like, what should you be using and why? Or what should you try to learn and why? Because at a certain point when they go out into the working world, people don't necessarily care what you use to get the job done if the end product is right, if you're communicating your point. And I agree that also, like, to some degree that, like, walks the line of setting them up for failure, of, like, not knowing the thing they need to know. But if we're going to teach them to be problem solvers, one of the problems is learning the tool.
I feel like I feel like I've been talking about or hearing this conversation for a while, and I feel like it's not the right question. I feel like the question is, how do we as educators open up space in our curriculum to teach new things? What are we gonna let go of? And how do we get new lines to bring in people who know how to do new things that we do not know how to do? Like, we do not know how to do all of these things. We are not gonna be able to keep up. That is okay. Like, I might, like, invest in a kind of pluralism for, like, the different programs. Like, okay, all I've got is, like, 7 laser printers and, like, 2 shitty labs. Like, how does my curriculum start to use that, maximize that? This also, though, assumes that, like, faculty and directors and deans have a shared interest or investment or point of view, which I do not find is necessarily the case. There are, like, so many good ideas about this, and there's, like, a complete shortage of how to act on this. And the more urgent, or the more, like, the longer I sit inside of academia, the more I'm like, where do we carve out this space in our curriculum for what it is we need to do, and how do we focus as designers on the specificities of our institutions and how to maximize that for our student body, which more and more we have very little control over.
I mean, that does lead into our next question, which is, how fluid should curriculum be? And how, you know, how have your curriculums developed and changed to respond to certain demands of student body or society or culture or design technology over this period of time?
Well, right now, we're in the midst of doing a semi-radical change for our program. We had a very siloed approach to teaching these different concentrations. So you went into broadcast design, you went into web design, and there were 6 required courses, and then there was 3 electives. And for a number of reasons, partially due to enrollment going up and then going down and having a difficult time filling all of these very specialized courses, and also finding that with the improvement of the economy, there are, you know, kind of specializations within areas. So we're breaking it open, and we're kind of, what we're doing is the students, instead of following a silo, they're picking from pots. And so we'll have a pot of, you know, skill required courses where you're learning the basic skills of video editing or web coding. And then we're going to have strategy courses where you're thinking about, you know, higher level problem solving and critical thinking skills. And then finally, there's going to be studio courses where you can take your skills and your strategy and execute your own ideas. And we're just putting it through curriculum right now. I'm excited to see how it turns out. But I think that there's a great opportunity here for students to be, instead of held by the hand and guided, that they kind of create their own specializations.
What we're doing is, or what I'm doing, of course, in any academic setting, we all disagree. So that always slows it down. But the way I look at it is I look at the job requirements for junior art directors and junior graphic designers. And I want to know what the industry expects, because we're creating people who have to get jobs. And so I work backwards. I do a lot of working backwards in all my courses, but in this in particular, what do my students need to be able to do when they hit the ground, so they can hit the ground running in terms of whether it's thinking skills or creativity skills or tech skills or anything. And we tend to make everything creative, critical, and tech all together. Every course deals with everything, but working backwards seems to be a good way to go.
We have this structure, I don't know if it's right, but 5 years ago we changed the curriculum so that students take 6 semesters of studio and 4 semesters of type. That's the core. And then within those studios, and this I'm thinking back to the like teaching software question, because I kind of like blasted through that. We don't teach software, but I guess it's more like the standard, right? Like we're not sitting up there teaching Creative Cloud, but as part of the studios, they get a diverse range, and we kind of structure them. You're thinking about content, you're thinking about voice, these sort of bigger issues, and each professor, we rotate through those studios per semester, and we kind of get to be flexible with them, like what we're actually teaching, so long as the general skills that we're going for are the outcome. And surrounding those students are allowed to take electives, and that's how we're able to be additionally flexible, because we can throw electives in where we feel like we may be missing something. And like in web, it's conceptual, but it's also skill. Like they need to be learning code alongside actually design concepts for the web. So we're teaching them that. And if they take a motion graphics class, they're learning After Effects. So there's some specific software skills once you specify through electives, but we're able to at least offer them on and off, depending on how we feel like we need to mix up the.
And what are the things that you're throwing in? Classes in coding, classes in?
Yeah, so we'll sometimes we'll pull from elsewhere in the university. Like we don't have the faculty to teach web design this semester, so we advise people to take the computer science programming course. And yes, you're not learning the design aspect of it, but the code will help you, and we'll write a petition to make that class count for that requirement. And we kind of push on the system a little bit in order to do that, because we don't have the faculty to teach all of the diverse skill sets that you might have, which is why we have to mix our electives. But it's motion graphics or interactive or experience design or web that we tack on to the studios, and then they can mix those in as they.
That's an interesting way to use the liberal arts to bolster the arts.
I have to echo that. It's the same way I have to do it. I mean, there's a 3D printing class in the physics department. I'm like, this semester you have to take that as one of your electives. Or, in English they had a class where they analyzed the actual form of books. And this was in the English department. I'm like, you have to take this class this semester, And I have to utilize the other departments to kind of give the skill sets for my students, especially in the critical thinking. We just changed our curriculum as well, and logistically, I just created a special topics class that constantly changes every year. I get to pick an adjunct that I think is doing interesting work, or is research is interesting, and that class will be that class for that semester, but it's within the curriculum, but it constantly changes.
I just want to add one more thought. When we teach After Effects, or this semester we're teaching AR and VR, but we're teaching it as immersive storytelling, so that you're learning the tech, but you're learning how to tell a story. And you're learning in terms of whether it's 3D, 360 video, or whether it's using AR, augmented reality, or whether it's using After Effects. It's always about thinking. It's always about the story. And the tech serves the story. But they do need to know the technology, but they also need to be able to tell a story and do it critically and think about what that means to the audience and the context and what it means to the brand or the social cause.
I feel like, I was just going to say, like just at a personal level, my teaching has changed in terms of how I write projects. I mean, the curriculum at Purchase is kind of changing, like how things change in the curriculum at large is different from how I approach things in my individual classes, in which I have complete control and can move in some ways faster or at least troubleshoot more things. And 10 years ago, I came out of Cal Arts and I was like, critical formalism, like critical formalism. And everything I did was about like generating structures and methodologies in my classes to get the students to make that form, right? And I've never been a problem solver. I've never been asking them to solve problems, but generate that form. And I mean, teaching graduate school now, I no longer teach form as an end in and of itself. And I do not teach craft as the mastery of a certain process or way of making. I teach craft as a way of learning how to learn and be able to recognize what a well-made thing is, as opposed to knowing how to make it expertly in one thing. That's like been a fundamental shift in like my curriculum.
I think you raised like a really good point there, which I'd be curious to hear everybody's point of view on this. That diversity in culture, the language barriers, those things that I mean, probably everybody who teaches encounters right now, but at BU, more so in our grad program, it's like 95% international, and 55% of that are students from China, and it's just that it's this crazy diversity, and it's having that conversation that they can have these conversations, but not all in the same language, and so they either segregate into their own populations, even within the studio, or it's a hard time like communicating as faculty, like this is what we think you need to get out of this, or where you want to go with this. I don't know how this affects you guys. But.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge to, like, depending on the institution. Like I've taught at University of Bridgeport, I taught at California College of the Arts, and you know, RISD and UConn now, and I think that across all of these different schools, the demographic is so drastically different. And regional changes too that are also influencing sort of the conversation that the students are having, and I think it's challenging. I don't know exactly what the solve is, but it's something to sort of grapple with though, and not to ignore as an educator, that you can't just kind of steamroll through and be like, I'm making this brief and we're all going to do it, and disregard like all of the sort of cultural sort of influences in the room. And I think for me, something that I try to do is try to be sensitive to who's in that space, and then also try to create projects that can extend into different cultural sort of experiences within the project. And so for one, I don't know if we're talking about projects and briefs. I guess that's kind of in this ish, kind of. Yeah. All right. But like, so for example, like one of the projects that I do in web design, which I teach, is called Making a Digital Quilt. And actually, Otis over here, he and I actually like kind of, while at RISD, kind of started this kind of process of thinking through web design and what does it mean, and how to kind of teach it to like in a contemporary sense. And so anyway, like one of the projects that I said within web design is to kind of teach like using the browser as a form-making tool that isn't necessarily for function. So it's kind of adverse to this like, here are all contemporary sort of like fundamental web design practices, but more of it having students think about it in a way that they can make, like I said, a quilt. And what does that look like? How do you create a collage in the browser? How do you create a space for kind of mashing up images and sound and text and all these different things? And within the context of this project, allowing students to be exposed to actual physical quilts from different cultures. So, you know, one of the things I'm interested in is textiles, and using textiles and quilts, images of it, like learning about quilts within African American culture, within Amish culture, within Japanese culture, and using this way to kind of fuse in some other sort of ways to kind of get that content in what they're making to be pushed a little bit more. And I think that to kind of offset the fact that you're trying to work with a lot of different people and be sensitive to all these different cultures. And I think for me, it's important that I try to reflect that too in the projects, even if you know, the students aren't necessarily wanting to talk to each other, but they should, and trying to create more of those spaces. So yeah, I think in my approach, I try to kind of operate similar to that. I don't know if that makes sense.
You know, in our school, the diversity comes in a different form. Most of our students are coming from the New York public school system. There's quite a variety of study skills and study habits. And because we are CUNY and we offer an associate degree in our program, we have an open enrollment policy, so we don't have a portfolio review. And they don't necessarily have to have graduated from high school. They have to take a reading, writing, and math exam, and if they don't pass it, then they take remedials. And if they don't pass the remedials, then they can't go any further. And at the same time, we're aiming to get them to the same point that all the other programs are getting into. The one thing that I see in more traditional programs that, and I don't know if we do it intentionally, but our students kind of beg for concrete instruction and examples that reflect the real world demands that are going to be expected of them in their jobs. And so projects like yours, I don't know that would necessarily work.
Well, and I think it's funny because I totally understand where you're coming from, and I think for me it's a balance of both. Like, so we're not just all doing like these web-based projects that aren't sort of like, they can't necessarily be realized, but I operate in a space, my practice operates in a space that I am an artist and a designer and this fusion of both. So like I feel it's important to not just teach such that it's for the job that you'll get when you leave, but that you can make and be expressive in this really sort of interesting way that is random and bizarre. And I think it's okay to be random and bizarre, in addition to kind of learning fundamental tools that show you what you can do when you leave that school.
Right. I mean, I think also one of the differences is that our students' parents have never been professionals. And so they can't say, well, this is, these are creative ideas, but this is what it's like to work in the corporate world, say. And so we kind of have to show them, more concrete ideas, I guess.
I mean, I think it's really interesting to see that, like, we seem to all have a lot of control in the classroom. So it's really beautiful that the students get this variety of voices in the classroom from they're really lucky, I think, now just listening to everyone here and thinking, wow, the students get all these different perspectives. And we want to get some audience perspectives. So should we open up for some questions,
yeah.
comments? I mean, it's so exciting to have so many educators here. It'd be so great to hear from some other people's thoughts about any of these issues.
So I have kind of like a comment. So for my undergraduate, I went to City College, and I found out that inside the college, there was an EDM, Electronic Arts and Design program. So I tried to apply, but I did not get in. But I still wanted to take all the classes, and I did, -1, which was thesis, which they have like a show at the end of the year. But I didn't take that class, but I took all of them. So I'm like, what should I say I did? Am I a BA or a secret BFA? So then there was a kind of like a lecture in the class about portfolio. I overheard a student ask the current director or a director, oh, I'm not in the BFA program, but I want to take portfolio. And she replied, oh, but we don't offer that for BA students. That was my current position, and I was like, I'm not part of your system, right? So I was trying to encourage that student, trying to look for like, hey, let's enter outside the school, don't give up. And of course, I didn't give up. I broke the rules in my undergrad and graduated. So now in my master's, I graduated my master's last year. I broke the rules there, and I got chewed up also at City College, branding and integrated design, integrated communications. So I graduated last year. I got chewed up by my director, and I kind of failed her a little bit, but I was like, no, I'm breaking the rules, this isn't how it is. But I'm really glad that I went into that. So now I'm teaching a baby instructor this year. So I'm happy to be here and listen to all of you guys' opinions and comments. I'm teaching high school students that come from underdeserved communities, right? So I'm getting them ready. And teaching graphic design, but also exposing them to the world and don't get into this small bubble. I'm teaching the basics of InDesign and Photoshop and how to make a poster, how to make a brand, how to make a brand story. They don't even know what they want to be in the future yet, but it's like, don't worry about it. Graphic design, and then opening them to different things that are going on, whether it's politics or their own families. And I have a diverse class, and it's kind of like fueling, like you are in where I was, and I'm giving back to them now, and that fuels me, and I see their faces light up when they're like, oh my God, this is so cool, how'd you do that? Like, you did it by yourself. I just taught you the basics. Look at what you've created, and that's wonderful.
That's great.
Yeah, to piggy on that, I think like the fact that you're teaching high school level is like so important, because for me, I was exposed at that level, and I did like a summer program when I was in high school to kind of really get me interested in design. And I remember coming into undergrad not really sure if this was going to be a lucrative career or like something that I could do, and I think that having more programs like that at a younger age for exposure for students is critical in then affecting what that diversity looks like when they get to college in the first place. Because I think that there's a, and we didn't really kind of talk about this, but like when you get into the workforce, what does that look like as a person of color? What does that look like for students that are graduating programs and then having to go work and then feeling sort of disconnected from that space? Because it happens to me all the time where I'm like, oh, I love design, this is great, and then I get to a certain space and I'm like, it's kind of diminished in terms of like it being diverse as it could be. And I think that high school programs, middle school programs that start sooner really influence that.
This is something that I've encountered in a number of different places, and I think that it was raised earlier today. And I'm just curious, it's more about universities, I guess, than institutions. There was, I believe you mentioned it, this inability, this assumption by students that they can't mix, that they don't mix. And I'm wondering if you could enlighten us as to why you think that might be the case.
I mean, for me, I've actually been told specifically by some of my Chinese students that it's just not, it's not part of at least their learning culture. So there's a shyness and there's a comfort level, first of all, about like their comfort level of speaking English in this very diverse studio environment with people from all over the world. But there's also, and this even comes down to making work, like having this comfort level to just be independent and make a thing and anything you want. Is like, well, no, you need to just tell me what I'm supposed to make and I'll make it and it'll be awesome. So it was like breaking out this freedom to be able to do that. Once we got them over that hurdle, and we encouraged them, even through assignments, to work in groups with other people. That sense of being able to voice your own opinion was very real for them, and it started to open up dialogue. It's imperfect at best, but it helps. They get them all in the same space together and make them work for 6 hours, and suddenly like these bonds start to break down. But we had to actively play a role and say, okay, well, you guys can't sit in this group anymore. Like, let's mix up desks and let's try this project where we mix the group.
It's so funny that you're saying this because I just had this same conversation with one of our adjuncts this week. There is a mature Chinese student who doesn't speak a lot of English, and they're working in pairs in this campaign development course. And so this student ended up getting paired up with this other, I mean, they're both bright students, but one of them is more westernized. And it was the same thing of, his skills are great, he wants you to tell him exactly what to execute, and he could do it beautifully, but the idea of just like thinking outside the box and it being completely open was so foreign, and he was so lost by this, and the instructor really didn't have any idea how to deal with it. My recommendation to him was, well, why don't you get in the middle of it and art direct this team? Because it was just really one pair, and all the other pairs were doing quite fine. But I mean, it sounds like an identical situation.
Yeah.
Me? Someone recently made this point to me that at this point, all of our students are coming out of no student left behind where they are told exactly what to do. And so part of that is, I think, trying to get them to make the decisions. And I'm handing out homework, and it's like, how many sketches do we have to do? Can we do it on the computer? It's so literal, and they are so literal because they have come from this background where you pass tests, you are told what to do, and you don't. I don't know. I think schools probably vary, but with that program, it was very literally, this is what you have to do to pass the test. And I think that's a problem for everybody at this point.
In my foundations class, in my graphic design 1 and 2 classes, all my assignments are open-ended. When I say make a poster, I want them to say, what does that mean? And then we can start to have a discussion. My graphic design 1, I mean, they always ask, well, what do you want me to make? I'm like, I don't know. I really don't know what I want you to make. Let's question this, all right? Let's question what I want you to make, or question my brief. That's where I kind of start with that. Like, again, I think I want them to develop that critical voice, like right from the start, and I really want them to question what design is right from the start. Because I think many of them come with these preconceived notions that I'm the guy that makes the website. I'm like, well, you might not be. You might be something else. I mean, so let's develop these kind of critical thinking skills so you can become something else. I mean, I've had students become writers for Howard Stern, and they write me, I had him write to me and say, I still hear you going, why did you do that? Or why is this that? Or how does that relate to that thing, you know? And he's writing, which is pretty awesome, you know?
But I think turning those, turning that rigidity that they often come in with, that I've got to meet a certain set of objectives, and try to open them up to be more free thinking. I see high anxiety in students to do this. This seems completely foreign to me, and to be able to comfort them that this is okay, that you can do this, and it's a big challenge, and it takes time, and it takes time in the curriculum that then, in some way, have to sort of deal with the curriculum to suit this opening up of their.
Well, I feel like they think there's a right way of doing it, but there's so many ways to do it.
It almost inhibits me from doing critiques at times because I'll say, well, you could look at it this way or that way, and they'll say, well, which one should I do? It's like, well, I want you to make that decision, but they really want to do the right thing.
Well, and unfortunately, it seems like they often spend a lot more time trying to figure out what they think you want from them than trying to figure out what they want to make, which seems to me like a total waste of energy.
I mean, I feel like the students also know this, though, that they're not blind to this. Like, I've asked students multiple semesters, why do you think this project is so hard for you? And the students will, they'll have a variety of answers. And this year, it was like, well, I'm used to taking tests. And just having that conversation in class and recognizing that, it's not necessarily my job to teach a student how to be a risk taker or a outside of the box thinker, because what is that? I'm not sure. But I do think that the students know these things also about themselves, and when we engage with them and ask them about it, they can tell us about it. That it's not just I guess I've stopped thinking about them as being passive participants and more starting to ask, okay, well, what do they know about how they work? Because once that's on the table, then a lot of that anxiety is lessened. I cannot have a project that is open-ended. The students are filled with anxiety. I do a lot of scaffolding. I'm a lot of scaffolding because I think that you can't move from, you just can't be thrown into an open space without them just, really feeling like they're getting nothing out of the class, which is not the point.
Yeah, and I think that scaffolding, phasing in of parts is helpful for them to kind of then, by the end of a process, see oh wait, I just did like all of this, but like not having it thrown out at once, I think helps to alleviate some of that anxiety.
Yeah. Just for disclosure, I'm related to graphic design by marriage.
Lucky you.
Next to me is a professor at the graduate design at the Prague Institute, so I'm getting all the things by osmosis, and sometimes going to review at the end of the year and see what students are doing and taking the liberty of asking their questions. And my educational background is from schools in 3 continents, so I have a little bit of a more cosmopolitan view of things. From what I just sitting hearing, I have a basic question. You are part of a whole. I mean, you are a department within a school, and my question is, do you serve a higher purpose that fits the purpose of the school, what kind of students they send to the world? Or you are little managers of little shops? Or put it this way, are you teaching people to have skills? I don't want to take tools. Tools is usually for certain purposes. To have skills that whatever avenue they would like to pursue in life in terms of academic studies, the skill that they get from you can help them. Or you are just transferring knowledge to them. Here, you would come to graphic design, I'll tell you how to do graphic design. And of course, then you'll get the tools that you need to do the thing. So what are you? Are you kind of teachers, or you are facilitators?
I'll quote Neil deGrasse Tyson. I think he said this. It's better to teach people how to think than what to think. So that's how I.
That's what I want to hear. I mean, you know, do you give them the fish, or you teach them how to fish?
How to fish.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that. I mean, that's even from like the weird nature of the project sometimes, and then questions always arise like, why are we doing this? And it's more, you know, and I'll say to the student like flat out, like, I don't really care what you make in the end. I'm interested in how you get there, and that's going to serve you for any number of things in life. And we have this discussion a lot, particularly with seniors in our program, like where you're going to go and get jobs, and how you're going to go out in the world. And our argument is that we're helping you become good and interesting people that can be successful. And if you go and get a job as a designer, awesome. And if you don't, also awesome. Like, go and do that too. But now you have a skill set of thinking that you can apply to lots of things. Because frankly, like, I feel like the field is so, the field of design is so competitive that if you don't think of yourself as a person that is an interesting person, then it doesn't really, you're setting yourself up for failure. And you're not going to go necessarily and get a job as the junior designer somewhere. You might, but you might not, because you might apply for that one and it falls through, and then, hey, you didn't want to be in Boston anyway, so then you moved to Kansas, and then what happens? Like, it's like life happens, and we're trying to, I mean, in maybe the College of Fine Arts, we're trying to think about that, like how are we preparing students as people and as what we would think as good people. It's like a weird thing, and maybe it makes us seem like we feel self-important or something, but I don't know, I think they should have some skill sets as people and not just in design, but just how do you approach life and content in general. And I think one of, being these programs within liberal arts universities, the liberal arts aspect of these schools really helps that sort of objective. I mean, I always like to think that our students come out more than anything as adaptable. Yeah. They've done these programs, they've done all these other courses, they've run into all sorts of problems and different people, and those things make them far more capable of turning a direction and going away from design and doing other fields and professions equally well and with the same enthusiasm that they've come to design with. So
My latest book is called Nimble. And I really believe that we have to teach people to be nimble thinkers. The industry is changing so rapidly that you have to consider everything in your content as you approach it. So I appreciate your question very much, because I think it's very important that they be adaptable and they learn to adapt quickly. And most of our students are first-generation college students, so I also have to teach them how to navigate finding a job, how to network, why it's important to network. It's almost like being a parent in a sense, because you're really teaching them to navigate so much more than design. It's a huge responsibility at this point in time.
The exciting part about teaching at a liberal arts school, it's really actually great to hear everybody speak and share their experience. I teach at a very small liberal arts school with core being very intense, so we have very little bit of time. What I've embraced and found really exciting is that we live in such an increasingly visual culture, and design has become so important, and everybody becomes a designer at every different level. Or if they're not designing, they are talking to designers, they're having communications with designers, they're working at either end of it. And so to be able to have that conversation and get people excited about the idea of what design is and how we relate to it, how it's propaganda, education, and how important it is to me my job. So if I find that one of my students becomes a designer or goes into that field, really, but mostly they're out there and they're more educated, they're more excited, they're more engaged.
I think, or I connect with that, and I'm also very curious about this idea, like to pick at the idea of like what it is to be a good person a little bit, because I think that to your point about delivering content, like we could be delivering content about what we think it is to be a good person too, right? So like, how do we look to the history of the discipline of design? What are its methodologies? What are its values in terms of being able to understand multiple points of view, in terms of being able to gather research from multiple sources, in terms of being able to like make things as a way of iterating or thinking or troubleshooting something. So one of the things I find, and this is also happens because I teach in the context of a liberal arts university as well, how does graphic design not just become like nothing, right? Like, oh, it's everything. So we teach nothing or everything, right? But like, how do we hold on to like something that is part of its history, its specificity, which I just think is a sort of ongoing, curious thing as an educator.
Well, this graphic design has changed tremendously and is doing it in a much faster pace. I mean, from day to day, things are changing. And therefore, teaching now has to be very different than it used to be. When somebody hires now I'm talking a big company like, for instance, Apple, they would hire a designer and not specifically know that they belong at this chair behind this desk. They will start somewhere and then meander into many different capabilities or things that are needed. Those who are able to adapt and see things in a much more wholesome way will make it up to the top, and the others will stay behind or not even survive. And I think, therefore, curriculums are changing. I know at Pratt we even changed. It was the School of Art and Design, and it was split into two. Now it's the School of Art and the School of Design, and the mindset of putting all the design disciplines together, and of course we're a little bit different because we're not a liberal arts school, but we have the engineers, and we have the interior design and the industrial designers and so on. So collaboration is definitely a hot word here, and that all feeds into what we want to prepare the next generation. But at the bottom of all this, and then coming back to your comment, I think everything has to be rooted by design principles. And the principles are the ones that do not change, because the way our eyes see and the psychology of a visual perception is there to stay. And building on a strong base like this into a wholesome and multiple direction versus, yes, you have to learn the programs because otherwise you cannot function, but they're going to change. And if you can't see things in a wholesome way of how to research, how to make it user-friendly, how to, right? Everything that goes into the word design. And clearly, if you try and define what is the difference between art and design. So I always give this funny example. Art, so she did a painting, she was very lucky, a gallery bought it, and he came and bought it from the gallery. Now he's inviting these two wonderful people, and they say, man, you bought, this is just amazing. And the next night for dinner, he invites the other crew, and everybody's saying, he paid money for it. You see, so art is in the eye of the beholder, and design has a whole other, there has to be a reason why to everything, because it has a functional, not just emotional, also emotional, but not just emotional. So that's kind of trying to tie several comments together. Thank you.
We can take a few more questions because people have their hands up, and then maybe we'll go drink.
I'm interested in understanding how your curriculums are structured in the sense that, having been an art student at an art school, now I'm pursuing a master's actually in design studies, and I feel like I have this whole other side of the coin of information that I'm fulfilling and to make that picture whole, the praxis and the criticism and theory. But I'm curious, most of you are undergrad, some of you teach graduate programs, but in your undergraduate, you have these studio classes, and then you have electives. And as part of this wonderful resource, which is a larger academic institution, how much influence do you have in what electives your students pick? How much influence do you have in faculty meetings to say, you know, this sociology class could be catered towards design and art and fine art? That's a very open question. How much can you make that difference so that the resources in the university are speaking to your students?
Not a ton. SUNY has pretty strict things about core requirements. Our core requirements are typically like lower level introductory, like survey courses. Like the students, in order to fulfill their BFA, they're going to be taking as few liberal arts credits as they can, and all of those will be in an effort to fulfill their core. It's hard to get a class to satisfy a core requirement. How many, like that's coming from SUNY Central. It's not like it's like a playground for them. I mean, if they want to spend a lot more money and stay a lot more semesters, they could, but I actually don't feel like I have, I mean, I work with other coordinators to try and identify, or like, let's get that programming class to fulfill a math core. but that is also like to the detriment of the idea of liberal arts, right? Go explore, like where I'm like masterminding it with like other boards of study being like, these are the electives, you know, so that I can try and, I mean, I think it's a problem.
I mean, our school is so big that while the students do have these courses they have to fulfill, their general education requirements in those content areas, there's a lot of courses in every one of those areas, so we do routinely go through and establish a sequence, a recommended sequence. Students don't have to follow it, but there are courses that we say, you know, these courses on film studies are actually really helpful if you're interested in motion graphics. So we can tailor things a bit. We don't have much control over, you know, talking to the professor and saying, I'd love if you geared it more.
So to follow up on that a little bit, do you often get pushback for a class that would seem, of course, it would be very much engineering or computer science, as you mentioned, and saying, you know, the class is full or it's on wait list, and someone would say, well, to you, the instructor, I'd love my student to be in your class. You say, well, why? He's not an engineering, he or she is not an engineering student. So, no, this is important. Do you have challenges in
prerequisites?
In having
prerequisites. Prerequisites are always a challenge for them to take a course other than an intro course. So that's one issue.
But other than that, no, I mean, I think generally the rest of the university is quite open and welcoming to art students entering their classes. They like that different perspective that those students often bring. So, yeah.
Vice versa.
Yeah.
Like if I could speak for a moment too, so I actually represent design history. I'm actually not a practitioner, and you're the only other voice I've heard so far to come from the liberal arts side. I guess design studies kind of is. And I teach with Jessica also at SUNY Purchase, and I hear her articulating conversations that we've had over and over about how hard it is because I'm in an entirely different part of the campus. We hardly ever see each other as well. So we're on the same side, but it's very hard to even have time to have a conversation. So what we have been trying to do is to start fulfilling the NASAD vision for incorporating design history, theory, criticism into the curriculum, and it's something that seems to be on the horizon that's got to start being done more because we have these practice-based programs and there's no kind of context in which the students know what they're doing. So it's a big issue and a problem, and it's a problem not just in terms of getting our administrations to understand what it is that has to be happening here, but it's also a problem from the students because we get constant pushback. Why do I have to take, like the class I'm teaching right now, Design and Culture, which is basically contemporary design theory criticism. Why do I have to take that class? Well, the best answer actually that I have come up with is, you're not taking it to get your first job. You're taking it to get your second job. Because what I'm teaching you is not just critical thinking, but there's something also that I haven't heard anybody mention, but there's a big problem with writing, too. And it's a problem that
we could be here all day.
And Arissa and I, you know, are doing this Design Incubation Fellowship, and Arissa and I, you know, are editing a peer-reviewed journal. I mean, and for designers, and it is a big problem. So there has to be a better dialogue going on this because you can't just train people that narrowly. So the liberal arts are important, but it's something that we need to have like a fuller conversation on too.
Just for those of you who don't know, NASAD is the National Association of Schools of Art and Design, and they're an outside accrediting agency. And they require, if you are NASAD accredited, they require 4 courses in art history, theory, and criticism.
I wonder how much of that's just going to happen naturally because design programs are expanding so much and there's so much interest in it. You know, in going through the NASAD accreditation, we were required to have a theory course, and so we wrote one specifically to get accreditation. But prior to that, Joel had a psychology, a visual perception course offered by the psychology department created, and also in the art history department there's the history of graphic design. So we required those 2 courses within our program, but they're considered liberal arts.
Can I just jump in really quickly and say that while that may be encouraged at the university level, once you start working, that's not encouraged. Like once you start working, they just said, that's great, you're a good writer, but like we need you to finish up this like layout really quickly. You have to make that like a personal imperative to want to write, to even continue. But then you first have to ask yourself, what am I going to write about? What can I add here that has value? Because really nobody cares what designers think. Honestly.
Well, I mean, I would argue though that
we all
as
care, but like generally people don't want to share.
As they're moving up in the roles, you don't stay a graphic designer for very long. As soon as you become, you're managing graphic designers and become an art director, then you definitely need writing skills.
Yeah, I get that. That's understandable. But when I'm talking about other critical thinking and critical theory that like contributes to the culture, like that's just something people don't care about. And so it's something you have to want to be like self-motivating to do, to continue to do. And I'm very doubtful because I've been working for over 10 years, working off my BFA, and it's just like people are like, that's very cute and all. Anyway, can you fix my iPhone? Like they just cannot connect.
I mean,
to what.
I mean, I would actually agree with you to a certain extent. I agree with everybody on this panel, but at the same time, I'm addicted to Marketplace. I don't know if any of you guys listen to that podcast. So I think it was last week, Kyrie Stahl was interviewing somebody who had a business, and you hear this over and over again that in America, there are not enough technically trained people to do these jobs, which is why they're going to India and China and bringing them in that way. And he basically pointedly said, universities have to think about training skills in technology so that they can fill these jobs. And I think that's the one thing that we seem to be missing. We're so afraid to talk about training software and training technology that we aren't preparing graduates for the workforce, and so they're having to go outside the country to find that.
All right, this is, I don't know if this is a question, but it speaks to what you're talking about. And I think in the end it is a question. So design, if you think about design thinking, we'll think about that. There's potentially like 3 or 4 buckets where design can live, right? And I've heard throughout the day a lot of exasperation maybe about tactics versus strategies of teaching. And I'm wondering if you feel that there is some kind of something happening to design pedagogy in general, where there is this kind of split, but everyone wants to put it under one arc.
Well, I think it's interesting because so being trained on the East Coast in terms of design, I feel like there regionally was a way of looking at graphic design kind of close to this tradition of handcraft and making and things like that. And when I went and was out in the Bay Area in startup land, like it was a very interesting sort of moment for me to kind of rub up against this, like, what is graphic design? What is design? And what is tech? What does that mean? What does it mean to be in a graphic design program, but to then become a visual designer in a tech company? What does it mean to then become a UX designer in a tech company if you studied graphic design? And I think I'm still grappling with it because it is almost a whole other industry, right? So to some degree, there is this like combining of all of it as one, but I also see it as a separate sort of way of looking at design that is product oriented for a purpose that is for people, right? And creating a series of products that, whether it's apps, whether it's a digital website experience, I think that way of viewing graphic design for me personally has become a whole other space. And I think it runs silo to the bookmaking, the bookbinding, the making of textiles, the making of all of these other things that are happening at the same time. And I think for students who are going through programs right now, who are having to figure out, oh, I want to work at Facebook, right? But I am being taught how to make a book right now, and having to grapple with this this friction that also happens. But I think what's interesting is being able to share both and not being resistant to both at the same time. And I think there was a conversation, I think, before about like, does that dilute your program if you're talking about a UX, UI, or like morphing your program to encompass all of these different things? And I think the pedagogy is so different across all of these different institutions. And in another conversation that I had with a colleague at a different institution, you're demographic of your students also influences how you can talk about or how you can sort of bring in all of these different topics, because the aims are different. So, you know, in sort of kind of getting back to the point of your students want to be trained and come out feeling like they are going to get a job, right? There is this need to have and make sure that you're allowing your students and providing your students those resources so they can come out and get a job. Because at the end of the day, I think there's also an economic, a social, an elitism that happens, where if you're not talking about like, hey, I want to know how to do this, that, and the other, you're not serving them, right? So there's that way of looking at it. But I also think at the same time, you know, being able to kind of bring in these sort of larger sort of systems that bring everything together, for me is how I kind of approach it. But yeah, it's hard, it's difficult. I teach web design. What does that look like? Like, there's so much in that space. It's gonna change. I keep constantly telling them in class, I'm like, hey, this is probably not gonna be a tool that you use when you graduate. And it's hard to kind of like, you know, create this, learn this, but know that it might change.
It's okay though, like it's about, I mean, in the end it's about communication.
Yeah.
All of it's about communication. So whether you're doing UX or UI or you're writing or whatever, it's about communicating with other people. That's just one of the big points that I try to make, and at least for my students, like connecting it back to the real world for a second. It's like, I know we're making these weird books and everything, but you know, the thing that comes up all the time is, what do you want someone else to get out of that thing that you made? And it doesn't matter what it is. It's a weird book, it's a web project, it's a poster, but we always go back to that question, what do you want people to understand? And just to kind of connect this to the writing thing, I think it's important for our students to be good writers because it's a form of communication. If they can write, then they're better able to articulate their idea to a client or to the art director at their job. I was making this because, and when you can put that in words, you can say those words. And so I make those connections a lot for my students. It's like they question the writing and they question the weird formal open-ended projects that we do sometimes. And I try to make these connections like, look, if you're sitting at the table with a client, they're not gonna buy your idea unless you can articulate why you're making the idea or what the thing is. And they have a hard time. Students right now, I make them all get up and just talk to me. And they can't talk to you. They know what they're doing. They can't put it into words. So we ask them to write about it and then get up and talk about it. So we try to connect these things. But it comes back to, like, there is, I think, in the industry, there starts to be this, like, divide of, like, silos of where you might go and work. But I think for a student as an undergrad going out to the world where any one of those could be a possibility for you, we're trying to get at the core, like, you're communicating with people. We are a service industry of design at the core. We work with people, and we work for people. That's just, even if you're doing self-generated work as a designer or whatever, but ultimately, like, people are on the other end of that, and you need to know that.
Just to look back to the good, teaching people to be good people, that's all about empathy, right? It's about your audience, it's about, I think that's where design thinking is so important because it teaches people to be empathetic people, and that's part of understanding and communicating.
I wanna go back to this, I've been working for 10 years. I mean, I work in design education and people don't care. Like the idea that, like, you know, we're training these students to go out and get these awesome jobs is not exactly my experience of the world, and it's why I teach, right? That these jobs are not all awesome jobs, and people don't care what you think. And so how can graphic design as a discipline provide agency for these students? Outlets, agency and access. I mean, to the point of, like, design history and theory, I mean, and if we go back to an earlier question about diversity in, like, our departments, I mean, I think we need to do a lot better job of meeting students where they are, talking about social media. I think we deliver a lot of content that we think we're supposed to get to about the history of our discipline, and we're not like focusing enough on what the students already know, how they communicate. We don't know how they communicate. We're just trying to teach them how we thought we should communicate. But you know, I feel really close to that, and I think it's good to talk about that. I think it's good to talk about that with the students too. Why do we do this? It's not all for a practical application.
And
it's to give us
my point.
Yeah, like,
you start to, it's not just the work, but start thinking as a designer, because I operate in the world as a very racialized, gendered human being, right? And I start to look at design through that lens, and I want to be able to articulate those ideas beyond just, yeah, I mean, I can write a brief, I can write a presentation, I'm very good at that. That's not the point. The point is what keeps me up at night is the way we are so hesitant on articulating these larger social issues within the context of design and how few people care. That's what I'm bothered by.
So does that play though into the reverse role of what role do you guys as graphic arts professors play in educating the liberal arts side about the larger design thinking as opposed to giving design students access to liberal arts, which is great. But what about all those liberal art people that are like, yeah, designers, you guys are just going to make my shit look pretty at the end of it.
Right.
So it's just maybe somewhat related to that. We just had a couple of incidents. So I'm teaching junior studio this semester. And I gave them one project that was, we just got a new vinyl cutter also. So this is like, okay, you guys need to make something with the vinyl cutter. And I said, and you can choose from, 4 topics. And it was like something you want people to know, something that inspires you, social media, and current events. So they would all pick something. So we had this one girl who was she's actually from Australia, but she was completely offended by the political campaign and comments from Donald Trump, etc. So she took comments and she had them cut out of vinyl, just small, and she kind of made this branded campaign that said, "Make America Say It Again." And her point was, we shouldn't hide these things. I think it's real. As a person, I feel like it's really important to raise these back up. So she did, without approval, cut all these things out of vinyl and then went and just kind of canvassed the campus and like put them in places and where people might encounter them and think about them, so that it was like inside a bathroom stall or on the door into the student union or on a bench, and she was really tailoring them. Well, that blew up into, it got covered by a sort of student publication, and then the Dean of Students office got involved, and it was extremely controversial because of Title IX complaints about hate speech and all this stuff, even though it was branded. And so she happened to know the person who wrote the article, so she said, "Hey, don't put my name out there, but this was the point of the project." So then they wrote another article, and it was this big conversation in the university. It was like, we brought it back to class. We said, look, like as a designer, like you might not do this at the place you work, but as a designer you have a voice and it's important, and you have a skill set that allows you to get in front of people in a way that is unexpected. All this stuff comes through the media and people are dead to it. But you put vinyl type on the bathroom stall and it blew up the campus. Like this is a way, and so I'm saying this as like, we're trying to encourage the students that their voice and opinion is important in the context of, you may go work in a place and they just don't give a shit about what you're saying. They want you to do the job. So is there an avenue, if you are self-motivated, to do your own thing a little bit because you have a skill set and it's different than most people have?
So how, in that context, you reconcile between jobs being sourced out to microchips, a person as an individual, and a person that is doing a certain job that has to fulfill certain requirement or purpose? How all this gets together within the little scope or little time that students are in our departments?
That's a good question, but
you said yourself that you're teaching them and within a few years their job might disappear.
True, and I think
we have a tendency to specialize in many areas. We're getting narrower and narrower and narrower, and we teach to the narrow part.
Yeah.
So if you spoke about the spirit of human being. So how in an environment of a student, which this is the only time in your life that you can be free, like I don't know what, without going to prison sometimes for your ideas or something like this. So how do you reconcile all these three, that somebody comes out and have the tools or the skills or whatever you want to call them to pursue further in life and achieve their targets?
They want them to go to graduate school.
I think it's a loaded question, and I think that
I tended to be.
I think that for me in my class, like I like to show a lot of different ways to make, and whether that is again a way to make that if you get out into the world and you're art directed, you can make a piece because you're being art directed. And working with someone who may be coming from top down, telling you how to create a project. And that is one way of making. I think another way of making is being, again, self-initiated in this like expressive way that may not have anything to do with a client. And I think that it's in that space that you can say or do whatever it is that you want as a designer. And I think for me, again, it's important that they can see a lot of different avenues and ultimately know that they can do that one day and then go do that another day. Or work for a year in a startup and then maybe actually I want to work in a museum. Or like being able to know that they are not locked into a particular role when they come out of school, that it has to be this, because it's not gonna be that. It could be something else. And I think that having a variability and knowing that they can do whatever they want.
No, you have to be like an amoeba.
Let's take the conversation. We could sit here all day. We have tons of more questions. We could definitely sit here all day. And we are so grateful to all of you for being the time to listen, to everybody for coming and being an audience. But let's take the conversation to the room and just go have a drink, have something to eat, and please hang out with us, talk, ask more questions, make more comments.